This lesson is on the equation of a circle. Let's start by looking at the definition of a circle. A circle is the set of all points that are the same distance from a fixed point, which we call the center of the circle. The radius is the distance from the center of the circle, that fixed point, to any other point on the circle. What I'm going to do next is show you the equation of a circle that is not centered at the origin and the equation of a circle that is centered at the origin. And then after I show you the equations, I'll give you a detailed explanation as to why the equation is able to describe the relationship between any xy point and the radius of the circle. So first of all, let's start with any circle. So the circle that it could be centered anywhere. It doesn't have to be at the origin. In that case, we call the center of the circle point HK, and the relationship between any xy point and the radius is x minus h squared plus y minus k squared is equal to the radius squared. If the circle is centered at the origin, that would make the h and k values 0, which means the equation would simplify to just x squared plus y squared equals r squared. Now, why do these equations describe the relationship between any xy point and the radius? Well, maybe let's look at a more clear diagram of a circle. Here I have a circle drawn that's centered at the origin, so I have the center labeled as the point 0, 0. If you can imagine me drawing a radius from this center, 0, 0, to any point on the circle, so anywhere on the circumference of the circle, it would connect to the circle at some point xy. So I'll label this point on the circumference of the circle as point xy. And I've drawn the radius. Let me label that as r to represent the radius of the circle. Now, if I were to describe the relationship between this xy point and the radius, if I were to go from the origin to that xy point, I could travel x units parallel to the x-axis and then y units parallel to the y-axis. So let me label those side lengths as x and y, and notice what I've created here is a right angle triangle. And what do we know about the relationship between the sides in a right angle triangle? We know that the sum of the squares of the shorter two sides, so x squared plus y squared, is equal to the square of the longest side. In this case, the longest side is the radius, so it's equal to the radius squared. And this is the equation of a circle. X squared plus y squared equals r squared. And that relationship between the xy point and the radius holds true for any xy point on the circumference of the circle if the circle is centered at the origin.